Today, we're going to talk about a shockwave, an event that didn't just rattle the global economy, it completely rewrote the rules. Its aftershocks literally created the economic world we live in today and gave us the main tool central banks now use to fight inflation, the interest rate hike.
And it all boils down to this really weird question. When prices are going crazy, the modern solution is to, well, intentionally slow down the economy, raise interest rates, make borrowing more expensive, and basically slam the brakes on spending. But to really understand why we fight rising prices with a recession, we have to go back in time, to a crisis that brought the entire world to its knees.
All right, let's get into it. And first, we need to understand the tool we're talking about. You have to picture it not as a delicate scalpel, but as a giant financial sledgehammer. It's what central banks grab when they need to bring an overheating economy back down to earth, and fast. The thinking behind it is pretty simple, but also pretty brutal. If you make it more expensive for people to get a mortgage or for a business to take out a loan, they'll stop spending so much. This cools off the demand for everything, and that, in theory, stops prices from spiraling upwards.
You know, this whole aggressive strategy wasn't just dreamed up in some academic meeting. No, it has a very specific origin story. It was forged in a decade of absolute economic chaos, a time when the world was facing a problem that most economists thought was totally impossible.
To get it, we've got to jump in our time machine and rewind to the 1970s. Now, this was a world that was basically drunk on oil. It was built on one single, powerful, and, as it turns out, very foolish assumption that cheap, abundant oil would just flow forever. An assumption that was about to blow up in everyone's face.
And this slide right here, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? Fuel economy wasn't even a word people used. We're talking about massive V8 land yachts, like the Cadillac Eldorado, that got a jaw-dropping 8 miles to the gallon. Can you even imagine? And why not? Gas was incredibly cheap, and nobody thought the party would ever end.
But look, this wasn't just about big cars. That cheap oil was the very foundation of society. Our suburbs? Designed for everyone to drive everywhere. Our entire industrial base, from factories to farms, it all ran on oil. And the West was becoming dangerously, deeply dependent on just a handful of countries to keep the whole machine running.
And this created a colossal vulnerability. I mean, the stability of the entire global economy was basically tied to the political stability of one of the most volatile regions on the planet. You can probably see where this is going. That weak spot was about to get exposed in the worst way imaginable.
And then it happened. Bam, bam, bam. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution throws out a key Western ally. That's followed by the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. And then the Iran-Iraq war breaks out, devastating the region. It was just one geopolitical bombshell after another, and it sent the entire world into a complete and total panic.
But here's the kicker. This is the most astonishing fact of the whole crisis. With all that chaos, the revolution, the war, everything, the actual drop in worldwide oil production was less than 4%. That's it. Other countries just turned on the tabs a little more to make up the difference.
So, wait a minute. If there wasn't a real shortage, what caused the crisis? It was a shortage of confidence. The fear of a future shortage was enough to change everyone's behavior. Drivers, companies, traders, they all started hoarding fuel. And that panic buying created the very gas lines and shortages that everyone was so afraid of in the first place.
And that panic, well, it had this terrifying ripple effect. It created an economic monster that just broke all the rules and left governments totally stumped.
They called it stagflation. See, up until this point, everybody just assumed that high inflation and high unemployment were opposites. You couldn't have both at the same time. But now, all of a sudden, the prices for everything were skyrocketing, but the economy was also grinding to a halt, and people were losing their jobs. It was literally the worst of both worlds.
And here's what was driving it. As oil prices pushed up the cost of, well, everything, workers rightly demanded higher wages just to keep up. Businesses then had to raise their prices to cover those higher wages. And that, of course, led to, you guessed it, more demands for higher wages. It was this vicious cycle where the simple expectation that prices would keep rising made it a reality.
The old economic playbook was totally useless. They needed a new plan, something much more drastic. And it came from the new chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, a guy named Paul Volcker, who decided the only way out was to pick up that sledgehammer.
So what did Volcker do? He raised the main interest rate to an almost unbelievable 20%.
Okay, just to put that into perspective, the recent rate hikes that have caused so much anxiety peaked at around 5.5%. This was on another level entirely.
The effect was immediate, and it was brutal. It became incredibly expensive to borrow money. Businesses folded. Unemployment shot up. But the strategy worked. The deep, painful recession that he engineered finally snapped that wage price spiral and wrestled inflation back under control. And that, right there, is the direct answer to our question from the beginning.
But the shock of the crisis and the shock of Volcker's cure did more than just end stagflation. The trauma of that whole period permanently reshaped our world in ways you can still see all around you today.
It was a global wake-up call about the dangers of being so dependent on one thing. For starters, it forced a revolution in efficiency. The average gas mileage of American cars basically doubled within a decade. This, of course, flung the door wide open for super-efficient Japanese car makers to come in and dominate the market. The crisis also sped up the decline of energy-guzzling heavy industry, which helped pave the way for the service economy we have today. And finally, as a lasting legacy, governments all over the world created huge strategic oil reserves, basically a giant national insurance policy against the next big panic.
You see, the real lesson of the 1970s wasn't actually about oil. It was about how any system, when it's built around a single point of failure, can be shattered by a simple crisis of confidence. And that forces us to ask a really important question today. We're not as vulnerable to an oil shock anymore, sure, but in our incredibly complex, interconnected world of semiconductors, global supply chains, and instant information, where is our next 4% panic just waiting to happen?